There are many differences between humans and the rest of the species on Earth, but one that has been expressed is that we alone are able to imagine the future. For a long time, I, and perhaps you, have dreaded that future. But it's now becoming apparent that it's not all doom and gloom. There's a chance for us to make amends, to complete our journey of development, manage our impact, and once again become a species in balance with nature.
Ever since filmmakers started making non-fiction films, they have been plagued by the concept of objectivity. Is it true? Is it accurate? Is it fair? Today's audiences are savvy to the creative process that governs film's creation, but for many, the question still remains as to whether documentaries can be deemed legitimate sources for accurate information. Are all documentaries inherently biased? And if so, how can they still be relevant for audiences? Documentaries are not only vehicles for representing the world, but also vehicles for producing knowledge and shaping public opinion. Because subjectivity informs their construction of meaning, I want to suggest that a better understanding of subjectivity enables us to then reverse engineer it as a tool to analyse meaning.
If an artist is moved by a landscape, if it evokes memories and associations, even subjective ones, then this will in turn affect and move an audience.
According to Bill Nichols, documentaries can be thought of in 4 modes of representation: expository, participatory, objective, and poetic. Each mode has a different impact on how audiences perceive and react to information by managing the influence of subjectivity differently, with some more obviously foregrounding the filmmaker's viewpoint. If a documentary viewpoint stands out, we may perceive its representations as biased. The documentary An Inconvenient Truth uses an expository mode with its lecture-esque format. A Life on Our Planet adopts a participatory mode with David Attenborough engaging us through his personal experiences. Planet of the Humans incorporates both expository and participatory elements as Jeff Gibbs questions the conventional knowledge of renewable energy. And Adam Laertes' A Short Film About Ice takes a different approach to its representation, using a poetic mode, relying on the tactility of haptic images and sounds to create an emotional resonance. In practice, any non-fiction film always involves a specific viewpoint.
And it's a threat from overfishing. Of course they're going to blame the dolphins.
Including every viewpoint in a feature-length documentary would be impossible. We can't possibly know everything about a subject. There are simply just too many influencing factors, and documentaries are an accurate reflection of that. No matter the mode of representation though, we can garner that whatever is left out of a documentary perpetuates the internal and surrounding biases. Because subjectivity reflects the ideological underpinnings through narrative framing and the aesthetic choices used by a filmmaker, it naturally impacts the way audiences perceive and engage with the issues represented. When looking at the role subjectivity plays then, it is useful to consider another 4 key aspects: authorship, perspective, narrative construction, and the aesthetics of representation. In regard to authorship, because the filmmaker is responsible for every decision in their documentary, their own beliefs, values, and biases influence both the selection and presentation of their subjects. Subjectivity here can manifest in the form of a selective emphasis on particular issues, the omission of alternative viewpoints, or the privileging of a specific narrative. One of the main problems with subjectivity in the Great Global Warming Swindle is that it heavily relies on cherry-picked data to support its argument, even suggesting that there is no correlation between CO2 emissions and global temperature.
We can't say that CO2 will drive climate. It certainly never did in the past.
This tightly restricted perspective does result in a strong argument, but it's at the detriment of the film's credibility. Concerning perspective, environmental documentaries in particular often adapt restrictive viewpoints to foster a greater sense of urgency and promote specific solutions. A limited perspective leads to the exploration of only a few topics though, which can potentially oversimplify complex problems or frame them exclusively within ideological or political contexts. The use of a fictional character in The Age of Stupid to explore environmental issues raises questions about the accuracy and reliability of the information presented. The combination of scientific data, coupled with a lack of reflexivity here, has the potential to lead audiences to incorrectly interpret the film as portraying a solely objective outlook. Narrative structures exist to engage viewers and communicate ideas, but as discussed, their constructions are heavily influenced by subjectivity. The selection and arrangement of events, inclusion or exclusion of contextual information, use of emotive techniques, dramatic arcs, and thematic motives all serve to elicit an emotional response from the audience and reinforce the chosen narrative. 2040 creates an emotional connection with the audience by using a narrative structure that follows a father's search for solutions to the environmental challenges that his daughter may face in the future. In much the same way as Attenborough's A Life on Our Planet, by personalising the issue of climate change, the film encourages the audience to empathise with the characters and thus take action. However, the film's highly optimistic view of the potential for these solutions, as well as not fully acknowledging the role of systemic issues, could create a false sense of hope, resulting in complacency, which would ultimately undermine the audience's ability to take effective action. Regarding aesthetics, the choice of specific imagery and music can be used to evoke a desired emotion from the audience. By influencing a viewer's emotional response, their perception of a subject can be altered to reinforce or challenge their existing beliefs. Although Seaspiracy's aesthetic choices, like the use of emotive music and powerful imagery, are highly effective in evoking an emotional response from the audience, they also work to undermine the documentary's credibility in the same way. They were only too happy to point out the gross labour abuses that occur in Thailand and the developing world. Not once the locals consulted or featured on screen. The scene depicting Thailand wasn't even filmed in Thailand. Seaspiracy's lack of self-reflection here is a weakness that can make it difficult for audiences to fully engage with the complexity of the problem presented. In order to create a more balanced and nuanced representation of environmental issues, it is important for documentary filmmakers to be self-reflective in their processes. No matter how objectively a filmmaker approaches any given subject, though, their film will always be filtered through their personal lens. How they choose to represent their subject is a decision that has the power to vastly alter the narrative. Subjectivity, used responsibly, can work to negate some of the problems of bias, like filmmakers acknowledging their relation to a subject and their methods of representation, but we cannot count on all filmmakers to adhere to this process. Reflecting on all this then, I think, perhaps counterintuitively, the poetic mode can be used to balance this precarious relationship between subjectivity, objectivity, and representation. Embracing subjectivity through the use of a poetic technique can help foreground questions about the relationship between art and reality. In the context of environmental issues, filmmakers like Leighty use these techniques to more subtly convey their message, presenting a philosophical viewpoint on how the act of filming impacts the captured moment. He highlights the interconnected relationship between the filmmaker and subject, demonstrating a responsibility for his subject and exemplifying that all actions have wider impacts. Poetic representations signify the importance of evoking pathos, and in effect, empathy.
I believe we must seek to find the balance of evoking pathos in the hearts of our audiences and provoking empathy in their minds.
In telling stories to inspire others, it is pain which gives hope, showing what we fear to lose most. So despite their facade, documentaries are not objective devices, but rather a medium that conducts its modes of representation to explore distinctive, subjective views and foster a public debate. Should we call on all documentaries to express every detail to then trust that they are telling the truth? In short, no. Making a documentary is just like writing an essay. You make a point, find evidence to back it up, acknowledge any counterpoints, and then argue your case. The beauty about a discussion is anyone can contribute, if they agree or disagree, which only further diversifies the perspectives and brings us closer to a realistic representation. One documentary cannot be objective, but maybe a number of them can begin to approximate it.
Most of the positive and negative things that bring about change in human civilization start with someone. Someone. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And sometimes big ideas make a big difference.
The most important thing to remember is that documentaries simply cannot include everything, but what is left absent from them could be the difference between a partial truth and a fabricated one. What we don't see might just be exactly what we need in order to change our minds.